Zach, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's such an honor to be here with you guys.
I've been so excited for this conversation for multiple reasons. Probably one of the biggest ones is that about a year ago, we had a Supra speaker series with you, and still probably one of the community's most favorite session. Everyone learned a ton, and they just found it so practical on how to think about managing their money, their wealth, how to use money as a tool. We also were introduced by someone who Ben and I both love dearly, Just Hurts and Marks. So when Just sends on someone, it's like, hey, this person's going to be great. And then the reason I'm really excited to talk to you is because I think you have a really, I've worked with multiple financial advisors and wealth managers, and I think you have a really unique take that I've never seen before, which is you talk a lot about this concept of value aligned wealth. And I'd love to start there. And maybe unpacking that concept of what does that mean, and also maybe explaining like your journey to get there. And I think that also will bring clarity of why that's so important to you.
Totally. Thanks for asking, Mark. And gosh, I really have enjoyed so much meeting the people that I've met in the Supra community, and just how everybody's so smart and capable and open and curious. And so it's great to be here with you. So values aligned wealth, what does it mean? It's going to mean different things to different people. But one of the analogies that I always use to talk about our work is, of course, some of financial planning and wealth management, most of it even, is technical. It's how can we save on taxes? How can we increase risk-adjusted investment return? And those sorts of concepts, which most people are familiar with. They don't necessarily know how to do it, but they at least know what it is. And so I like to start with the analogy of a road trip. If you were going on a road trip, good tax planning and investment management does the equivalent of making your car go faster and with greater fuel efficiency. But much more important than that is getting the GPS set correctly. Because if you're going the wrong way, going faster doesn't help. Actually, it might even hurt because you're getting to the wrong place faster. So I think just a huge important part of good wealth management is really an important part of good life management. It's getting clear on what's important and what a person is trying to accomplish. And a thing that almost no financial advisor ever tries to do is think seriously about what kinds of problems money can solve and what kinds of problems it can't solve. And trying to use resources efficiently to target the problems that it's really efficient at resolving. And I think this actually ties back with some sort of key product concepts. I'm not a product manager myself, but I think this relates really closely to the start with the end in mind ethos from product management, which is what are we really trying to accomplish and how can we work backwards to engineer that kind of outcome?
It's so interesting because I feel like most people, and maybe I'm even guilty of this at times, like when we think about wealth accumulation, it feels like it's a single swim lane that just ends with more, right?
Yeah.
So it's one, it's not like there's a bunch of different options on the map that I can pick and I pick one. It's more like just more is better. And the faster I can get more and accumulate more wealth, and then the better it is. And it sounds, what I'm hearing so far is kind of like, that's an oversimplification of what the map actually looks like and what the menu of options actually looks like.
I think that you're right, Ben, if you zoom in on the question of what's my net worth. But actually, that's not the right question. The right question is, do I have a fulfilling, meaningful life? And having a higher net worth creates more options and more choices that can naturally lead people to making decisions that result in a meaningful, happy, fulfilling life. But actually, there's very little correlation once you're a professional level earner between more money and more wealth and more life satisfaction. It really starts to break down. I think this is the $150,000 question, which is the research pretty clearly shows that there's little, if any, correlation between more happiness once a person has about $150,000 a year in income, which is true of most product people, which is true of most financial people, if you've had even a slightly successful start to one's career. So the question is, if most of us know this, why do we keep working harder for more money? What is it about how we're wired? And I have a lot of theories about that, but I think at core, it makes sense to take a step back and start optimizing for things that aren't necessarily net worth. Now, it's almost always a good idea to take money you're not using and turn it into more money because it creates more options later. So I'm definitely like pro net worth and have really take a lot of professional satisfaction from the work we've been able to do with clients that help make new things possible in their lives. But let me give you an example. If somebody was narrowly focused on maximizing their net worth, they would never take a sabbatical. They would never take a lower paying job. They would never work fewer hours. And I think if a person, actually, let me ask you guys a question. If you stop for a minute and think about either the last week or the last month or the last year, and what was a time that you felt really connected and fulfilled?
Mark, you go first.
Yeah. I think for me, like there's almost like different pillars in my life. And I think I probably can find situations or moments in those different pillars. There's definitely been parts at work that I've been super fulfilled, right? And like when I get a message from a member being, hey, you helped me in this way and this is the impact that it had, like that just brings so much joy. Or recording this podcast with Ben every week, I feel like I get to talk to really interesting people and learn, and that's amazing. But then also like when I'm spending time with my family and I can be fully present and I don't have to be feeling the pressure that I need to check my Slack on my phone, and I can actually be there and know that, hey, like I'm never going to get that moment back. Or when I'm playing paddle, running with friends, that's also beautiful, right? That we share this thing that we both love. But I think that the thing that it has in common is probably I'm doing something that I love with people that I love, and I can be present. I think those are kind of like almost like what those things have in common.
Yeah.
But really well said. Yeah, Zach, you're asking. I just got back from a month in France with my wife and my daughter, and we spent a lot of time with my wife's mom and her boyfriend, and had like, I don't want to say fully unplugged, but a bit like 2.5 weeks in the south of France, going swimming like almost every day, and like lots of nature and wine and cheese and bread and just like simple life. Felt very meaningful. So you're asking me about a time frame that's pretty special. But I think that the things about it that were meaningful, I think, are a lot of what Mark just talked about. It's like the people, it's the connection. And then I always ping Mark because we like to celebrate wins together. But yeah, like when I do a lot of, I teach a course and I help people get ready for job interviews. And when I get messages from people that I just passed my round and I failed this twice in the last 5 years and I finally was able to pass it because of your help. Thank you so much. It's gonna be like life-changing for my family. Like those kind of messages are, there's nothing my daughter or my wife can do with me to give me that feeling. So that's like just a different kind of feeling for sure.
Totally. And I think y'all are really touching on a bunch of the core themes that tend to drive life satisfaction. And one of them is a feeling of being of service. And I think, Ben and Mark, some of your professional topics that you mentioned were times when you really feel like you're making a difference for people in their lives. And different people get their sense of service from different parts of their lives. For a lot of people, and especially men, a lot of it comes from our work. But also other categories which tend to drive fulfillment are deeply held interest, spiritual or religious community, family, and friends. And those are almost all things that your experiences touch. And to put it in a financial term, it's really helpful to have a diversified portfolio. You really need to be hitting a lot of those areas and to be investing in different parts of one. And we all need to be investing in different parts of our life so that we're really finding meaning in those places. And money helps with that. And one of the things that's common among people in tech especially is that they tend towards periods of over-concentration, to keep it in financial portfolio terms, where they're very devoted to the work and getting a lot of meaning from the intensity of whether it's a 0 to 1 launch or whether they're bringing a product through a more mature ecosystem. That stuff can be really exciting and really meaningful, but often it means that they're really in the Slack notifications and they're not in managing to be fully present with other parts of their lives. And then at some point, things slow down and all of a sudden they can mute those Slack notifications and be really present in the south of France, you know? Go ahead,
Happy
Ben.
you bring that up because I'm not big in black and white terms, but if I were to use binary thinking for a moment and bucket the kind of people that I help get ready for interviews. And specifically, I do a lot of like meta level interviews for the company and interview prep at least. And I actually try to advise a lot of the people that come to me for coaching to not go into an intense job like that if they're not prepared for it. Even though it's the highest paying job that they can get, I tell people, look, everyone I know at Meta right now, regardless of level, is working 60 hours a week. They're in constant leadership level reviews. You're not going to have weekends. Your nights are going to be crazy. And there's a bucket of people that say, you know what, I don't know if I want that. And they are looking for more balance in their day-to-day life. And then there's a different bucket of people that are willing to almost treat it like a tour of duty, or like say, I'm willing to give up everything other than work for a couple of years to make 800K a year or something like that. And then once I have $1 million saved up in the bank or something, I can take time off, or I'll have optionality. And I think over the course of my journey with my relationship with money, I think I've generally stayed in the first bucket of trying to find the balance on an ongoing basis. And the periods in which I found myself spiking towards I need more money and I'm willing to take the trade-offs, I found my happiness and my overall life satisfaction always dipped due to the trade-offs. It's almost like I was really bad at predicting the impact of those trade-offs on my overall life satisfaction. So what you're saying is just like resonating a lot. And some people can be just really extreme in how they think about swinging that pendulum back and forth. And I think my mode of operation is to try to live more like a well-balanced everyday life, because it just feels more sustainable and less like chaotic.
Yeah. I think that what that brings up for me is something that actually Ben and I talk a lot about. And I think there's like a parallel here on the game of climbing the corporate ladder and feeling like you're playing someone else's game that has been designed to be highly addictive and to not make you realize that there is a game with promotions, making more money. And I think there's the same game also happening with less. I think it's more of like the social pressure of, hey, like you need to make more money and like you need to compare yourself with the Joneses, but almost like where there's this somewhere implicitly people have made the decision that, hey, like the goal here is to grow your bank account and grow your spending power. And that's really what success looks like, right? And I think that's why I really liked your analogy of the GPS. And I think what's interesting, I love talking about money with friends, because I think you learn a lot about like how people are thinking about it. And I think that's when I started doing that, I got a lot of unlocks. But I've seen people in two camps almost. I think people that know that they're playing that game, but have convinced themselves like, hey, that's the game that I want to be playing. But even though maybe that's like what they think they should be doing, but not like deep inside, it's not what they know that it's probably like a better path for them. And then I think there's the other camp where I think people just don't really know what are the options and what are like destinations.
What else could I be doing? Yeah. What else could I be optimizing for? What else could the scoreboard look like if it's not my bank account or my net worth?
Because they don't have any model in their life or no one that they can look up to be like, oh, that's a really cool blueprint that I want to follow. So I think what I'm getting at here is, and sometimes I feel like I know some blueprints, but I'm missing some. So I'm curious, Zach, do you have any questions or like reflections that you have your clients think through to maybe help them like open that horizon of options and possibilities on how to think about it?
Yeah. So I'm so glad you're thinking about that, Mark, because one of the natural KPIs that people gravitate towards is money, because it's obvious and it's measurable. And most of the other things that matter in life are not naturally quantified. So it's like not surprising that people gravitate towards it, and especially the role that it plays in society. And a lot of corporate settings and other settings are gamified to respond to our instincts in that area. So one of the things that I actually studied social science, well, economics too, but social science more broadly as an undergraduate, and a lot of the things that I learned in non-economics classes turned out to be more relevant to my work. And one of them is this really interesting idea that comes out of sociology and anthropology called reference group, which is almost everybody has a couple of people that they look to, that they're close to, who help define what's normal and reasonable for them. It's like the more complex academic-y keeping up with the Joneses model. And almost everybody is roughly the average of the 5 people that they spend the most time with. And we can choose who we spend the most time with And we can choose to spend time with people who are more intentional or less intentional, more locked into the corporate ladder or more locked into relationships. And that has a profound effect on how our life will shake out. So let me give you an example of, I have a close professional colleague who runs a different financial planning firm. And one of the things he measures is how many days does he take out of the office in a year. And he's a guy who spends a lot of time with his family. He spends a lot of time being active in youth sports because that's a passion of his. And because he measures something that's quantifiable, that's not like a raw financial metric of his business, it means it helps him optimize for something that's also really important to him. But Mark, you asked me a very specific question, which is,
I love that way. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I want to start doing that. I've told Mark that one of the things I miss the most about living in the Bay Area is nature. And this last winter/fall, I feel like I had an unlock where I started taking Fridays off to go hiking, but I'd let myself off the hook every once in a while, not take a Friday off. But if I set a goal of taking 10 Fridays a year to go hiking with my dog, I feel like that would keep me more accountable to celebrating that I did that.
Oh, Ben, I love that. It actually reminds me, I should say the person that I mentioned was John Schurer, who runs a financial planning firm right outside Madison, Wisconsin. But actually, Ben, your point reminded me of two friends of mine who I go camping with once a year, and they meet up once a month to hike one of the Adirondack peaks. And they've been working their way through over a number of years. And it's nice to put a social accountability dimension on it, because if you have an accountability partner, you'll be more likely to do it, and it can build a relationship as well as be in nature. So I don't know.
I wish my dog could hold me accountable. It's
right. Dogs are really good at holding us accountable to making sure that we walk them at the right times. And
I don't think he's got that long-term capability planning. Yeah.
So Mark, to bring it back to your question about what do we ask clients, we learned a modality from George Kinder that is sometimes called life planning or financial life planning. And it has a specific set of 3 questions, which we send to clients as a writing and reflection exercise. If you guys want, I'll send them to you later. But I'll tell you the first question right now, which is, I want you to imagine a world where you had enough money so that you didn't have to worry at all about money now or in the future. How would you live your life? How would it be different? What would you have? Who would you be? What would you do? I don't want you to hold back at all on your dreams. And I want you to imagine a life which is complete and deeply yours. So we can actually do that if you want, but that's the question. And if you want to chat a little bit more about it, why don't you think about your answers and we can talk about them if you feel comfortable. And then I can tell you some broad observations from having talked about that topic with a few hundred households by now.
Mark, I'm happy to go first. I just have a couple big thoughts.
Yeah.
The first thing that comes to mind is I think we would probably still be in New York, but we would have a bit more of a diversified location strategy. So I think instead of maybe spending 11 months a year in New York and doing a month a year in France, maybe we spend 9 months a year here, or 8 or 9 months here, and spend the other 3 or 4 months across a diversity of other places. Because I like geographic diversity. And I think more money, unlimited money, would potentially unlock not having to think about double rent or double payments or premium childcare while traveling or stuff like that, or even bringing family along to travel to be able to help with Gaia, my daughter. That's the first thing. And I would say the second thing is, while we're in New York, we'd probably just upgrade our living situation. I don't think we need a mansion or a $10 million penthouse or anything, but going from 2-bed, 2-bath without outdoor space to maybe a 3-bed, so we can have a guest bedroom and host some family and maybe have an outdoor space. Maybe get a car and not have to worry about the implications of getting a car. So we just have a little bit more freedom for that kind of stuff and getaways. But as far as what I do on a day-to-day basis, to derive meaning and joy, I don't think I would change how I spend my day for the most part. And I feel very lucky to be able to say that right now.
Right on. Mark, let me buy you an extra second to think about it and say to you, Ben, now you can probably feel immediately why this is something that we do as part of our onboarding process, because it is really, if you do the normal thing where a financial advisor says, what are your goals? People will kind of switch into the role of saying the kinds of things that they think that you're supposed to say to a financial advisor. We need to do monthly saving for Gaia's college education, which probably is a good idea. We should put that on the board. But what you just shared were what are the core things that you have a theory will be major unlocks in the course of your life over the next many years. And the job of a good financial advisor in this situation will be to figure out a plan that makes as much of that possible as soon as possible and encourages you to approach it with the spirit of discovery, which is we constantly have theories about what we want, and we don't usually test most of them very systematically. So help think about creating a testable hypothesis around some of those big ticket items and figure out what we can learn. And if the test feedback comes back very positive, you have an excitement loop around that, and it's really easy to figure out how to drive it towards completion and success. And so that's why we start with this much more comprehensive, deep sort of view, because if you ask questions the right way, you get much richer, more meaningful answers.
Yeah, I think about probably about a year ago, I went through like a breakup and I was like feeling a little bit down. And one of my best friends, he actually like walked me through like a very similar exercise, right? I'd be like, hey, let's think big. Like in 10 years, like what will your dream life look like?
Yeah.
And then we like walked through it. And then one of the most powerful things, like after like, maybe spent like 20 minutes talking about it. And then one of the most powerful things he did was, that's great. What can we start doing to living that life tomorrow? And that was such an unlock. I'm like, wait, there's all these things that I'm just like waiting, but I don't really have to wait on. I mean, of course, like if I say like, hey, I have to start flying private, I might have to wait on that. But hey, like I really care about my health, right? And I want to invest more there, and I want to eat really healthy, and I want to get training from someone that is really good and I can learn, and those were all things that like were very attainable where I was at. So I think, and it just kind of gave me satisfaction right away. And it almost just like that mindset shift, right? Of, hey, like why am I waiting? Is there a good reason? And I think that just asking that question and then kind of like putting the pressure to break that mold of, hey, there's the constraints that you're putting on yourself are completely artificial, was really cool.
Yeah. People create all these self-limiting beliefs about what's possible, and they often have very rough, unstudied instincts about money that contribute to a money script that they can't do the kinds of things they want because of some sort of amorphous financial implication. And one of the things that I think is important is really getting much more serious. Now, Ben said earlier that a lot of people have the view that I just want to figure out how to get $1 million saved, and then I'll have a lot more flexibility. And you know what? It's really true, because investment returns are exponential. More time invested has a profound impact. So let me just give you a very simple example. Somebody who contributes $5,000 to their retirement. This is not a product focused example. This is my normal people example. But somebody who contributes $5,000 a year from age 22 to 32 and then never saves again ends up with a lot more money in retirement, assuming it has normal fees and compounding and stuff, than somebody who starts at 40, saves the same $5,000 a year until they're 65. The first person puts away $5,000 times 10 years, $50,000. The second person puts 5,000 times 25 years. They put away 2.5 times as much money and end up with less, because there really is a huge impact to starting early. So I don't want to poo that, but I also, Mark, want to raise up a point that you made, which I think is extremely important. A lot of us are situated in the sort of marshmallow test framework where we've learned that deferring gratification is the secret to success. So first of all, that experiment's been totally debunked. When they controlled for wealth, the effect fell out completely. And there was really no correlation between whether people ate the marshmallow or didn't and their latter success once it was properly controlled. But I think a big thing that happens in financial planning is the traditional way that people do it is they say, you have to sacrifice now so that you'll be comfortable in 40 years. Most people are not motivated by things that are 40 years in the future. Everybody has a different like hedonic discounting factor, and people who are higher in ADHD traits will have a higher discount factor. So like things that are in the future are less motivated. Everybody's different for personality and different neurotype reasons. But the point is, everybody has a discount factor and it's not that motivating. And part of the model of focusing in on what do you really want and what can we do now, which we do, and Mark, you were talking about how effective it was with your friend, is that it creates an enthusiasm momentum drive where starting to do things, not only do you feel good because the thing makes you happy because you correctly chose, but it also creates this sense that you have agency and you're building that possibility. And it creates new resources, which are being very careful and disciplined requires a lot of bandwidth, which if you apply it to accomplishing things that matter to you is actually much more effective for most people. And when people get on fire, not in the retire early sense, but just in the intense life enthusiasm alignment sense, all of a sudden things tend to go really well in their work and go really well in their life. And often they end up with really good financial outcomes, partly because they feel so in alignment around their life satisfaction and also acting in accordance with their values and the impact they want to have in the world.
Yeah.
We had, just to add one more thought, Mark, sorry.
Yeah.
I worked for many years in the union movement and the labor movement, and I learned from a brilliant organizer the difference between action and activity is like doing stuff, and action is doing stuff in a strategic and meaningful way to move towards a goal. And so many of us fill our lives with activity and are missing out on the action. And switching from activity to action, both professionally and personally, unlocks life at a different level. Sorry, Mark, you were saying.
No, I'm so glad you brought that up. Because I was just going to agree with you that I don't know if there's any studies or anything, but it's definitely been true in my life that good things happen when I start operating from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. And I think I just tend to do the right thing. And I tend to be more creative. I feel more liberated. I feel, just my fulfillment goes up. And same thing with kind of what you were saying, right? Like doing something for the sake of doing it versus putting intentionality behind it. And that's also a big factor. So that definitely resonates. I'm really curious now. What is the second question that you ask?
The first question is very exciting. We removed any reasonable constraint and asked you to dream. The second question is a bit more of a downer. I want you to imagine that you've just left a meeting with your doctor who's told you that you have only 5 to 10 years left to live. You'll never be in pain. You won't know in advance exactly when you'll die, but you do know that it'll be within the next 5 to 10 years. How would you change your life?
Man, that is a serious one.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a little dark.
It's crazy because the first place my head went to would be how old would my daughter be by the time I'm gone? And then how am I planning currently to spend the time with her over the next 5 to 10 years versus how would I spend? That's the first place my head went. And it had nothing to do with travel or anything like that. And I bet a lot of people with kids would probably go there first. And you notice that when you asked me earlier, what are the types of things money would enable for me if I had an unlimited amount of it? And thinking back to my response, none of it had to do with my daughter. And I find that to be a very interesting interplay between those two questions.
Yeah, that's part of why we ask the questions in different ways, because each one can reveal a slightly different thought. Now what we're doing at a meta level is we've added first we removed constraints and now we're adding artificial constraints, and it'll activate different parts. Each of those is a true thread in U-Ban. It's pulling out different pieces. But yes, to your point, it's very common to focus in on core relationships, which for parents is often with partners, if they have them, and with their kid or kids. And one of the things that's true, and we often are accidentally or willfully oblivious about, is that something like 90% of the time we spend with our kids will be before they're 18. And so it's not this 5 to 10 years, but there really are just, Ben, remind me how old Guy is.
She's 2.5. So thankfully, the bulk of our time together is still ahead of us. Yeah.
But yeah, I have occasionally talked to clients who were in meta style jobs where they were missing dinner every night. And they say things like, dinner with my family is important to me. And we talk about how important is that. And then
there's some people that don't see their kids during the week because they leave before their kids wake up. They have to head out the door, and then they come back after their kids are sleeping. And I honestly can't imagine it.
It's a painful and hard thing about, especially life in tech, which is a young person's game where y'all are experts in this field. So maybe you can correct my thinking. But my sense is the core of most people's career is going to be 25 to 50. There are not a lot of people at the sort of top startups and biggest firms who are like in their 60s, which is sad because it means that the most intense career years overlap almost perfectly with the most intense family and parenting years. And that means those things are in competition for somebody's time and life energy.
If you want to play that game. And I think that's a big, the reason I call that out explicitly is because Mark and I talk a lot about choosing what game you want to play. And I think if you play a game in which the only way to accumulate more wealth is to climb that corporate ladder, then what we just said is true. The family obligations and the ability to earn will be in direct competition with each other. But I think if you play a different game and there's ways to accumulate money that are not about climbing a corporate ladder, but they're different. In this phase of life, I'm finding that I have no ceiling on my earnings right now because I don't have a job. I don't have a boss. The way to accumulate money is simply by determining how can I create value and capture value by creating useful things in the world and putting price points on them. And so that game feels exciting because I don't think it doesn't compete with being here for dinner. It doesn't compete with spending time with my kids. So I think if someone's listening, it's just so important to remember, the games that you choose to play are a choice. And there could be a perception that starts when you're 5 years old or 6 years old from your parents or from your environment that tells you there's really only one game to play. And it's important to remember that there are other games.
Yeah, I think the other part I'll say, kind of back to the example that Zach, you gave about your friend, right? That he measures success based on how many days he takes off, right? There's one thing of saying, hey, I want to play this game, but I think also there's the system, right, of that you need to set up for you in order to measure success in that game. And I think that's and I often fall into that trap myself. I'm playing this game, but then I'm not keeping track of any of the metrics that would help me tell if I'm playing this game correctly, right? My internal scorecard is not aligned with the game that I want to be playing. So therefore, I'm one, I'm not holding myself accountable, and then two, I'm not really prioritizing that. And I think the other way I've seen is when priorities and calendars are not speaking the same language, and often the calendar ends up being the source of truth. Yeah, I think
Mark, not to push back, but I'm truly curious now. Do you really feel like you have nothing quantifiable at all in your life that helps you track your overall just progress that is not dollars, your life satisfaction? I know you use an Oura ring, you track your quality of sleep, you track there's those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, I think I've gotten better at it, but I'm sure I could still be doing better. But I think the trap that I fall into often is that sometimes my calendar and my priorities are not fully aligned. But I am a pretty reflective person of, hey, I want to be exercising, 7 times a week, right? That's really important to me. I want to be seeing friends at least 3 times a week. I want to talk to my family at least once a week. Those are things that I'm keeping track of. But I think sometimes as a whole, let's say in a month, let's say I have a month where I want to prioritize family or friends. It's still hard to find months where that's where I spent the biggest bulk of my time, if that makes sense.
If you're enjoying this conversation, please check out the links in the show notes to support the podcast. Mark and I do this out of love, but to keep it going, we also need your support. Thanks, and now back to the episode.
I think, Mark, you've just laid out 2 distinct and really important points. One is the metrics sort of KPI piece of it, and the other is the habituality rhythm piece of it, which is one of my sort of broad philosophies is that we should automate things that we want to happen and reduce the friction as much as possible. And we should not spend any effort to reduce friction and possibly even create it on things that we don't want to have happen. One of the ways that we reduce friction is building a habit or routine or rhythm about something. I bet you've done that around working out. I don't want to put you on the spot, but my experience is a lot of people who have built successful rhythms love talking about their workout rhythms. So I'd be happy to hear about it if you want to share.
Yeah, it's quite simple, right? Like I have
on his calendar.
my calendar that is pretty sacred, and that nothing can be scheduled on top of it.
Other than when I extend our conversations to go over your gym blocks, which I'm sure you love.
Yeah. And then I get a little bit mad at Ben internally. I'm like, you're messing with my health. And then, I think there's I enjoy playing paddle running with friends too. So like, I also have a forcing function of every Sunday when I'm planning my week, sending those messages out, be like, hey, I'd love to do this with you. So that's almost like a recurring task that I have in Asana that reminds me to do that.
Another example is this podcast. When we started, Zach, we actually handled the scheduling of every single one of these episodes as an exercise in starting in a blank sheet. Let's just figure out planning, like you're trying to grab coffee with someone or trying to plan just like a random ad hoc meeting. And at some point, I forget, maybe it was around like episode 15 or 20, we're like, should we just have a couple recording slots on the calendar every week? And then those are the only slots that we ever offer people. And I think that has allowed us to, that has reduced the friction for doing this podcast by creating like predictability and habituality. And it's also allowed us to create a backlog, because sometimes we can record 2 episodes in 1 week. Like we did this week, we did one yesterday, we did one today. And so I think that's all to reinforce the point of the habituality and the reduction of friction for desirable activities, I think is really important.
Yeah. And one of the things that's neat so I think if somebody could just press a button and have the gym be gone to for them in a way which made them healthy, a lot more people would be healthy. So going to the gym has an extra set of challenges. But one of the neat things about financial life is there really are a lot of ways that you can just automate it, make a decision once, and not have to keep making the decision about, I mentioned earlier, saving for college. You can just set $500 a month or whatever to just go into a college savings account and be automatically invested. 401k programs are probably the best version of this, which is there's just a wonderful kind of decision architecture that lets you make one decision once, but lets a person increase their financial stability every week they're at their job, because the money just automatically goes to their retirement. It's automatically invested. Hopefully they made good investment choices. Hopefully the market goes more up than down. That's great. And part of building a good financial life, whether it's with an advisor or personally, is to just figure out what sorts of things you can automate so you're not constantly second guessing yourself. And that interplays with one of the biggest investment challenges that a lot of people face is, for a variety of sort of neuroscientific reasons and how cognitive biases work, we have a strong tendency to try to beat the market and want to beat the market and figure out, is it a good time to invest or is it not a good time to invest? And the literature almost universally shows that people do better when they just invest consistently over time instead of trying to guess whether the market's up or down, which makes sense, right? Because the market goes up something like 52% of days and something like 70% of years, depending on exactly what indices you're looking at. And since it tends to go up over time, the more time, the better people tend to do.
There's a saying I like around that helped me crystallize this concept a few years ago. It's that time in market outperforms timing the market.
Totally. That's exactly, and I love that same phrase. So that's just another example of, there's just a whole set of hacks that have to do with automating things. And actually, Ben, when you were talking about your entrepreneurial journey, I was thinking a little bit about mine, which is I had a variety of jobs in the union world, and I was one of the early employees of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and I got to do a lot of good in those roles. But I feel like I really came alive when I started my own company, partly because it let me build a team of colleagues who had complementary skills. And there's a set of things I'm really good at. There's a set of things that I'm not that good at. And I spent a lot of my early career feeling bad about the things that I wasn't good at and trying to motivate myself and not having a lot of success. And I can look back with a smile about it now, but that was really hard professionally. And there's something that's really special about being in a phase of one's life and one's career when they can focus on the things that they love and are good at and figure out how to complement with the almost nobody is good at and enjoys everything that they need to generate benefit to the world or economic value, or however you want to measure it. We all need to find the right collaborators. And certainly some people are more fit for a more bureaucratic setting than others. But just, I don't know. I was thinking about that as you were sharing your story.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, I want to note that's like super interesting, right? I think like in the first like 40 minutes of this conversation, and we've talked very little about money or tactical things to talk about money, which I think just like a meta point that I want to observe of like how, how there's so much depth to this topic. And often it starts with not the money, which I think is really interesting. And it's like a good reminder for myself. But I think as someone who loves optimizing and loves hacks, I love like this new kind of segment of the conversation of, hey, here, like this, all these small things that you can do that will make your life easier and that will set you up for success. Yeah, like for someone who's a product leader or working in tech, what are some other things that they should just really be thinking about that it's a small thing, but it's going to bring a lot of leverage down the line? What are some other hacks that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, one thing that comes up a lot for product leaders is that they tend to have spiky incomes when they're in a firm and things are going really well. Their income will be much higher, and then they might go on a sabbatical while they're trying to figure out the next thing. And in that year, their income will be lower. And if you average it over time, their income is very strong. But there's actually huge tax planning opportunities for people with spiky income. So for instance, there's an idea called a Roth conversion, where in low income years, you convert some money that had been in a tax deferred account into an account where it'll be tax free in retirement. And I can get into the nitty gritty of it, but it's actually hard to figure out the exact mechanics, because sometimes if somebody's income's really low, then they have healthcare subsidies and other things like that. And you don't accidentally want to artificially raise your income in a way that compromises benefits. That's a little bit of a tangled web, but that's just one example of something that comes from spiky income. Of course, the most obvious thing that most people can do right away is just maximize their retirement contribution. And a lot of people who are in the tech space, and which most product folks are at companies that let them make mega backdoor Roth contributions. And a person could just Google about that and find 70 million articles, because everybody who wants to work with tech people writes their own article that's exactly the same as everybody else's article about what a mega backdoor Roth is. So those are a couple. Depending on, a lot of this also will have to do with company stage. Mega backdoor tends to be more for people in decently into the Series C, Series D, public company, that kind of thing. But then there's a whole other set of tools that apply to folks who are in early stage companies, especially companies whose value is less than 50 million, which will obviously vary by company where in the seed cycle that is. Those folks, it's much more important to file their 83B elections. Of course, they should consult I have to say, you should consult a professional, and this is not financial or legal advice, but generally speaking, if you join a company very early, instead of getting RSUs, you're going to get options. And those options are going to be valued at an exceptionally low dollar value, because if you're very early, the 409A is not very high. You might get 10,000 options that are worth like $1,000 or something. And if you file an 83B election, then you get to pay tax right now on those shares, but you pay the tax on $1,000 rather than what they'll eventually become. And then the growth after that gets taxed as long-term capital gains rather than ordinary income, and long-term capital gains much lower. This is exactly the kind of thing.
Can I ask a question there?
Please.
On the QSBS, right? Like that's like I think that's a limit. And QSBS is like qualified small business stock.
That's where I was going next. QSBS is another early company thing where there's this mind-boggling rule that if you get your equity in a company when it's worth less than $50 million and it's been a C Corp for at least 5 years, there's a couple other rules that people should look up. But at a broad level, it means that you get to sell them for $10 million tax-free, like no taxes at all. So you join, let's say you're employee 30 at the company, you get $1,000 worth of shares, the company goes bananas, your shares are worth $10 million at IPO, the IPO happens, you sell them, you just get $10 million and you don't have to pay any taxes. And it's like, now,
Just wild.
Totally wild. Most companies never are going to grow that much. There's a very small percentage of the time that this is the dream that everybody imagines, but it's even a little nuttier, which is it's not $10 million per original owner. It's $10 million per current owner. So there's a whole set of strategies that are sometimes called stacking, where you set up various irrevocable trusts to hold some of your QSBS shares. One might benefit a child, or maybe a person has multiple children and split it into a few different ones. If a person feels pretty confident in their marriage, they might use a SLAT, which is a spousal trust. And sometimes somebody might use a charitable trust of sorts. So if somebody's really bullish on the company, they might put some of their shares into multiple different entities. So as long as they're separate legal entities, they should qualify, although somebody should, of course, ask a lawyer about their particular situation. But it's not uncommon for somebody to have 2, 3, 4, 5 entities. If you have 5 entities, you could get as much as a $50 million tax-free windfall. Really keeping track of one of the things we always ask when new clients come and it's not clear whether their equity is QSBS eligible or not is talk to the corporate secretary or talk to the head of HR, whomever is the right person in the company to let them know, because the tax planning is just totally different. And if somebody thinks if an advisor thinks there's going to be tax on that and there's not, they're going to make bad recommendations. So it's really important for the employee and their advisors to know if somebody's in a situation where the company's doing well and QSBS is a factor, they almost certainly are going to want a tax advisor who may also be a wealth manager and advisor. And they almost certainly want a really good estate planning lawyer.
Yeah.
Okay, that's actually what I was just going to clarify. I was going to ask, what's like the minimum set of characters that someone in this hypothetical situation should like have in their life as their trusted advisor? So I heard if a financial advisor, you consider that different than a wealth manager? Or do you consider that the same?
Some different people, none of these terms are regulated, which is a disaster. And we really should have a proper regulatory definition of who is an insurance salesman and who is a fiduciary advisor. And they should have different titles so you can just know what their title is and what their legal obligation to you is. But we don't have that. So the way I tend to use financial advisor, you've got a financial planner and an investment manager. And generally speaking, if you're doing financial planning and investment management, and you're coordinating with other tax and legal professionals, then a lot of people call that a wealth manager or wealth advisor. And then really wealthy people, like somewhere between 50 million and 100 million in net worth, depending on the circumstances, it often makes sense to just, instead of hiring a firm, certainly when you're getting into multiple hundred of millions, people very often just have a person who works directly for them and only for them and sets up a family office where they don't just use an accounting firm, they just have a guy who works for the family.
So let's imagine. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Let's imagine, just because I want to paint a picture that's really concrete, because I'm not yet in this bucket, but let's imagine $5 million net worth of liquid assets. And let's say that person joins a early stage company. So maybe they take less salary in the near term, but they feel really bullish and they get this kind of package we're talking about, and they want to put themselves in a position to achieve their goals. What are how many different professionals would you say they need to get in their corner that they talk to on a regular basis to cover all the bases we've talked about so far?
Right. Certainly it's possible that people can do it themselves. I find it's very rare that anybody actually manages to do that without making some kind of big mistake somewhere. It's theoretically possible. I just rarely see it. And so they might do some self-management, but let me just lay out the areas where they need to figure out the right answers, which is they need comprehensive multi-year tax planning. It is rare to get that from a tax preparer, because tax preparers usually are just looking at that year. They're not using software to run multi-year estimates of income, and their tax preparers are usually transactional rather than relational. which isn't bad. Like their job is to just throughput a lot of tax returns for the most part. You can find exceptions. So you need good tax preparation. You need good tax advice. Good tax advice is usually going to come from a sophisticated financial planner, financial advisor, wealth manager, whatever they call themselves. You also are going to need investment management, which often is a service that's bundled in. So like, for instance, for our clients, we're doing the financial planning, what accounts should you contribute to, what are your goals, kind of stuff. We're also doing the tax planning. What are all the various maneuvers you should do this year, next year, and the following year? What happens if the company goes to the moon? What happens if things crap out? What are the contingencies? You're also going to need investment management that you can do yourself or your advisor can do. It's often good for an advisor to do it because then you don't have to think about it. And also they're probably going to be much more systematic in how they implement it. I could talk more, and they probably can do things that are more sophisticated than what an individual can do. And the more taxes the individual pays, the more benefit there is to clever approaches like personalized indexing, or I can tell you about that later. The other category, which is really important, especially in the situation you described, where somebody has equity in a company which is not worth very much now, but they think might be worth quite a lot later, is that they really need an estate strategy. And they should work with some combination of their wealth manager and a lawyer to figure it out. And I would highly recommend that somebody in that situation work with, that's usually called an estate attorney or an estate planning attorney, but that they choose an estate lawyer who is used to working with entrepreneurs and founders. Most are not. And if, for instance, they're not savvy to QSBS and stacking, you could leave a huge amount of benefit on the table. Because I'll add one more nerdy little caveat here. When you move money out of your name as the employee and into various other vehicles, if you move more than $20,000 worth, or $19,000, it'll go up to 20 eventually, it detracts from your lifetime federal estate tax exemption. Right now, it keeps changing, but
it's like 11 million.
Yeah, it's gone up a little bit, but we could use that number just as a rough approximation. I think it might be all the way up to 15 now. I'd have to look it up. But the point is, each individual has like millions of dollars. And if they die, if a married couple dies with less than about $25 million or so, their estate doesn't pay any federal estate tax deduction taxes. Some clever people figured out at some point, wait a second. If I'm going to have to pay tax on the $25 million and first dollar, and I have $30 million, and I'm about to die, why don't I just give my kids $5 million now, and then we won't have to pay any taxes? And the IRS said, wait a second, that's not how this is supposed to work. If you give a lot of money, we just subtract that from your exemption. So if you give $5 million away, you don't have a $25 million exemption, now you have a $20 million exemption. So the way this plays out with QSBS is some people wait too long to move those shares. And if the shares are worth $1 million by the time they want to move them, they'll erode their estate tax exemption by $1 million. If they're still going to 10X, that's a really good decision. But it would have been better for most people to have made that decision when they were worth a de minimis amount that wouldn't reduce their. So that's just the kind of thing that you want. There's one argument the other way, though, which is if you end up having an exit where all the shares together are worth $9 million, you might not want to have the hassle of a bunch of extra irrevocable trusts, and some of them in your kid's name or your cousin's name. And so you can't know prospectively whether your exit's going to be $5 million or $9 million or $50 million. So there's some argument in favor of being willing to reduce your exemption a little bit or meaningfully in exchange for being able to make that decision when the company has already done its first 10X and you have more of a sense of the trajectory. So my point isn't that there's not like one obvious answer, which is why it's good to have advisors who understand what the trade-offs are. And one thing I would always suggest when people are talking to an advisor is to say, okay, what's the trade-off here? What's weighing on each side of this decision? Because the client will often have really useful insights in building out that risk map.
Yeah, I think that's the other I went through an exit, complicated like stock options, different tax, AMT. I wasn't lucky enough that I joined the company when we qualified for QSBS, unfortunately. But yeah, and I found it was really helpful of having a separate person that does tax planning, a different person that does the actual tax preparation, and then having a financial advisor, was that they could almost argue against each other. And I think that was just really helpful to get a picture of what's important to them, what's their risk profile. And then I could just take that, like triangulate that information, see where they agreed, disagreed. And that allowed me to feel like, okay, I'm getting like a well-rounded decision, which I thought was just really helpful. And just like another kind of plug for just like having multiple people in your corner, because everyone is optimizing for different things. And I think that's important. Well, one thing, and I think that to your point of like setting up trusts and all those things, I think like the trade-off there is you're adding a lot more complexity to your life. Yeah. You have to do tax preparation every year for that trust, right? So it's like,
that's right.
That's definitely like, but I'm curious, like, just in general, like, when should people start thinking about their trust and estate planning, regardless of whether you're in a Series A that qualifies for QSBS? How do you talk to your clients about that? Because I think that's like something that it's one of those things that you wish you had, but you never know when you're going to need it. Like, you never know. Let's hope not, but tomorrow I could get hit by a bus and.
No, that's right.
And it can be a mess. As someone who lost their dad and had to deal with all of that, right? Like, just like,
I'm sorry, Mark.
Like, just it's super messy, especially if it's not set up correctly. So yeah, I think that just, I'm curious, like, how do you tell your clients to deal with that?
Totally. There's one of the most practical sections of the Talmud is a discussion of exactly this question. And one rabbi asks, when should a person set their affairs in order? And another rabbi says, the day before you die. And then the first rabbi says, but how do I know when I'm going to die? And the second rabbi says, exactly. And I think that's just it. It's really what I generally recommend for people, especially in a situation, people have all different kinds of family structures, right? And so if somebody is married and would want their spouse to inherit their assets, and they're both young and healthy, it's good to do this stuff, but it's fine for it to be approximately right instead of really precise, unless there's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of money involved. You want it to be pretty precise. But if you're talking about a few $1 million or less, it's probably fine to have a simple, you don't necessarily even need a trust if all the accounts are correctly titled.
So the default, if someone has no prenup, they have no trust set up, no will, just like literally no paperwork whatsoever, they're just married to someone and they get hit by a bus, is the default in most places that your assets simply just go to your spouse and you don't have to worry about that?
It varies a bit by state, but my understanding, and I'm not a lawyer, of course, but my understanding is that in the vast majority of states in the United States, if you're married and you don't have kids, the money mostly just goes to your spouse. If you're not married and you don't have kids, then it is not so clear. Sometimes parents are involved, sometimes siblings are involved. So if one thing that I've heard estate lawyers often say is you currently have an estate plan, whether you have a will or not, it just is the default in whatever state you live in. So Ben, I think you're right to think about it that way. The first thing that I generally would recommend to people to do, because it's very fast and very easy, is any place where they have assets, a brokerage account or their retirement account or whatever, they almost all have a simple form. Often you can just log on online and fill it out, which is a beneficiary form. And it says, essentially, if I die, who should the money go to? Who should be the primary beneficiary, meaning if they're still alive, who does it go to? And you can generally split it up between multiple people or charities or whatever, if you like. And then who's the sometimes called conditional or secondary beneficiary or something like that, which means if the primary beneficiary predeceases you, there's a lawyer's term for a very dark concept. If that person's no longer available or turns down the money, who does it go to next? So you can just fill out that form very quickly while you're looking up a lawyer or doing an online tool. We have an online tool. These have gotten much better. So we have an online tool that our clients can use for free that will help them set up wills and trusts and that kind of thing. It'll also ask a bunch of questions that will figure out whether that person actually should just use a professional lawyer. Like, for instance, if somebody's trying to manage federal estate taxes, it's usually well worth it to hire a professional. Or for instance, if somebody has a child with special needs, trusts are much more technical and specific, and you probably want to work with a lawyer who has expertise in special needs. There's a few conditions, but 80 or 90% of cases can just use very simple docs. And I think that's actually fine. It's cheap. It's easy. The hardest part by far for most people is just getting around to getting it notarized or witnessed by, it depends on the state, but it's often two distinct people who don't have a material interest in the document. So it could be your neighbors or like people at work or something. But there's just like an annoying action step that if nobody's bottom lining it for you, a lot of people just have completed documents that are not legally binding because they just like never did the procedural step. Usually it takes until they have their second kid. I would recommend, by the way, it's really important to have a will you can do it if you don't have kids, but it's especially important if you do have kids because there's no other way that's legally binding, to my knowledge, that explains who you want to take care of your kids if you can't take care of your kids.
I was just going to bring that up. I recently spent some time with one of my really good friends who had an excellent financial outcome, started working on estate planning and walked me through all of the layers that are not the how to invest the money or who gets the money, but like it's all about, they have multiple kids and it's about how to determine how much money goes to which places and various scenarios that accompany custodial relationships with the kids. So basically, once the kids are all 18, it's all about like how much money the kids get in various scenarios to make sure they're okay. But before the kids are 18, there's all this extra stuff that has to be figured out for like exactly who gets the kids and then how much money those people get in various years. And I was like, wow, like this is such a level of planning that is important and also sucks to think about.
Matters. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I was just saying it's so dark to think about. And at the same time, like my wife and I haven't drafted a will yet. And so this keeps me up at night because every time we do anything that's just the two of us, there's a part of me that's if the car goes off the road or something happens, like we haven't left, it's ambiguous. The courts will have to like figure out what happens to our daughter, right? So that part feels very time sensitive. And yet it's like such a dark conversation to bring up. We don't want to talk about it when we're it's not something you just bring up at breakfast or at dinner. You have to sit down and think about that stuff. So maybe I'm sharing a bit too much, but it's like good to get ahead of it. Yeah.
Like I think prenup is the same way. It's hey, like we haven't even gotten married yet, but let's talk about like how this fails. And then when it fails, if it fails, here's how we're going to handle it. But
as you would guess, I have thoughts about that one too, which is prenups are super important. And anytime people have a meaningful difference in assets, like certainly if you're looking at $1 million, but possibly less than that, it really makes a lot of sense to think ahead about what would be fair. I don't know if y'all have had friends who have gone through acrimonious divorces, but I've certainly had a couple. And it's very hard to figure out what's fair once there's that much friction and intensity in the relationship and people know which side they're on. One of the really nice things about doing a prenup when people feel positively about the relationship is that it's much more easy to be generous and they don't necessarily know who's going to be in which circumstance. So there's a behind the veil of ignorance side. So when people say, wait a second, this feels really unromantic, like we're about to get married and you're already quitting on the relationship, my rejoinder is this is something that you should only do when you feel optimistic about the relationship, because that's when you can be generous and fair to each other. So it's please, Mark.
No, the only thing I was going to say, I actually I know a couple of people that their relationship fell through the process of the prenup. And at the time I was like, that sucks. But later in line, I think we were able to talk about that's probably the best thing that ever happened to you.
Right? Yeah. Save 20 years.
Yeah. Cheapest prenup you'll get. But I think the point here is that I think it's almost like when you start a business with someone, right? I think the ability to have such a hard, intense conversation and be able to communicate clearly about it.
Yeah.
It's probably such an indicator of how well you'll do long term, right? Because if you're able to have that conversation with a clear mind, grounded, and also like you have, depending on the money, you have top lawyers on both sides that are painting you the worst case scenario of like how that person's going to screw you over. And if you're able to get through that, I think you're probably going to have a good relationship.
It's a certain kind of stress test. And I'm not sure how correlated being able to pass through stressful situations is, but it's certainly positively correlated, just not perfectly correlated. two other thoughts about this particular topic. Actually, Ben, or pivoting back to your topic, I should say. I wrote a series of blog posts a while ago that was conversations every couple should have about money. And sometimes people don't have scripts for those conversations. They're not quite sure how to have the conversation. So, that series is helpful. But one of the observations, which I think would likely be obvious to just about everybody about a hard conversation, per your point, Mark, is you should not be hungry. You should not have a hard stop that you feel like you need to keep checking your watch about. You should have slept a little bit. Now, Ben, I know you mentioned you had a 2.5-year-old, so I'm not sure how reliably and consistently you are about sleep. Hopefully that's gotten good. But
Yeah, we've been lucky on the sleep front.
Yeah, totally. So I also really am a big fan of scheduling dedicated time. So one thing that I find really works well for some couples is to have a quarterly or twice a year, just like family retreat, where it's just you and your wife and you like have an agenda of stuff conversations.
Yeah,
that need
you
more
haven't met my
spaciousness.
wife, so I don't think
She won't go on a retreat with you, man.
She's very French and has an allergic reaction to business-like conversations about marriage and family and life outside of work. Stop PMing me. Why are you PMing me? Yeah, that's a lot of what I get.
That's actually makes a good case for a professional that you both feel comfortable with, because I think as professionals with pride of work, we like to think that a big part of what attracts people to us is our wisdom or our technical acumen or something like that. But really, a main way that good professionals add value is to just bug people into scheduling time to talk about things, and then just being there when the people who are the experts in their own lives raise and resolve the questions.
Yeah, it's very different for us. If her and I got pings like once a month or once every few months being like, hey, have you guys like figured out yet what you want happening to Gaia if you both get hit by a bus, versus me bringing it up once a month and being like, hey, like, what are we going to do if we get hit by a bus? Those are very different kinds of conversations. So maybe I should covertly start working with an advisor that starts bugging us and then forces the question.
Yeah, I'm very transparent. So I might just reach out and say, hey, this isn't my area of expertise, and the dynamic this dynamic isn't working for me, and I get the sense it's not working for you. One idea I had to transform the dynamic is what if? And then,
the relationship, that facilitation, that mediation, that relationship side, the human side of what you do is so critical. Like I don't know what percentage of your role that falls into, but I suspect that's what makes the people that are best at what you do, I suspect, are really good at that part.
Yeah. I sometimes say that personal finance is at least as much personal as it is finance. And I think it's really true. One of the challenging things about hiring and training advisors is they need to have strong analytic skills to be able to do the technical planning, but they also need to have strong interpersonal skills in terms of spotting what's making somebody nervous, how do you make them comfortable, what's going on in their relationship, has one partner been talking more than the other, how do we reframe this conversation to make everybody able to show up and feel empowered here. And running a technical meeting and tracking all the interpersonal and emotional dynamics can be challenging. And I think it's actually familiar to product folks who are in a similar bind, where they need to be able to track the technical stuff well enough to know what's reasonable to be talking about and asking the engineers to do. But they also need to talk to the business folks, and they also need to be related to the broader question of how everybody's feeling in the internal politics. So I think like product folks like really get what it's like to be at the intersection of a bunch of skills that are people who sometimes struggle to talk to each other.
Yeah, maybe we'll send you some product people your way, who want to do a career way.
I feel like I'm thinking about you. You're like a relationship therapy rabbi with a financial background. It's kind of
right. Right. The only one of those that I'm licensed to do is financial planning. So I like to think that's what I do. But it is surely the case that if people who take financial planning deeply seriously, I think, should not just be trying to turn money into more money. That is a part of the job, and it's an important part of the job. But that's not the hard part of the job. The hard part of the job is helping people turn their lives into meaningful, fulfilling, and mindful ways, and using those financial resources to support their life vision. And I think not everybody is in a place in life where they're the right fit for advisors who take that level of seriousness. But I think most of the people listening to the podcast are, and I would just encourage them to, if they're going to hire an advisor, find one who takes their life satisfaction extremely seriously, because ultimately, that if we say start with the end in mind, that's the end. And earlier, when we were talking about times of meaning, in the last amount of time, I was just thinking over Labor Day, we went camping with some friends of ours to an unexceptional mid-Atlantic campground, and it was so special. And my kids just, came in the tent to snuggle and tell us how much they love camping and how much they love running around with their friends. And the simple joy on the face of a kid who is perfectly toasted on marshmallow is completely invaluable. And that's what, for me, that's what the end is. Am I in a place where I'm able to contribute to my community and help on important political issues in ways that give meaning? And are things going on in the company where we can help people who need and want help? And I'm an extrovert, so I love meeting new people with new, interesting problems, technical, emotional, etc. I love it. And is my life in balance between those things? Do I have the right combination of them? And I can tell that you both are striving for that too. And it brings me, and I think all my colleagues, a lot of joy to be able to journey with people as they figure out hard technical questions, but also in actionable sort of ways that cut through the clutter.
I think that's a beautiful place to wrap. 2 final questions for you, Zach. One is, where can people learn more about what you do, what your firm does? And then how can the audience be helpful to you?
Well, thanks for asking. In terms of where to find me, anybody can always email me at Zach, Z-A-C-H, at valuesadded.com. That's values plural, because we're trying to add your values. I always think when you're naming a company, it should be slightly clever, but not too clever. But so Zach at valuesadded.com. I stopped using Twitter and I started using Blue Sky. So my handle over there is, I stupidly use my last name, which is hard to spell, but it's ZTEUTSCH. Or if you send me an email, I'm always happy to send you the link and it'll be in the footer. And then in terms of how people can help, we're blessed to be in a place where a lot of people want to work with the firm. So if somebody decides listening to this sounds interesting to them, the kind of challenges they're facing are the kind we help with, we'd be happy to talk to them. All they need to do is just email me and we'll send them a Calendly link and get into the queue. We're not actually taking clients right now. We'll take another cohort of clients in January, but one of my commitment is, as part of my penance for joining a field that's full of people who are, let's just say, not client-centered in their approach. As part of my penance, anybody who reaches out, I will do my best to help accelerate their journey towards finding the right advisor. So even if they need something like right now, they're going through an IPO or something, there's several that are active right now. If they're listening to this, I will be delighted if they email me to send them some names that they might reach out to.
We'll include those links in the show notes. I got to say, I really enjoyed this conversation, Zach. I appreciate how intentional you are with the way that you're approaching this space and helping people. I got a lot out of this conversation. I suspect a lot of the audience will have as well. So I just really appreciate you doing this.
Oh, Ben, Mark, thank you so much for having me on. I loved having the chance to learn more about what's important to you. And now I'm going to think about changing the game and what are the unlocks I can seek myself. So thank you for teaching me some of the ways you all are thinking.
I think the game that you're playing seems like a really good game right now. You strike me as a very happy person who's living a very fulfilling life that has a lot of very important, like meaningful moments in it, like the one you just shared with us about like last weekend. So don't change your game too much. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. This is a wrap. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.